Chapter 5, Lesson 6, Use the Pythagorean Theorem. The Pythagorean theorem can be used to solve a variety of problems. It is helpful to use a diagram to determine what part of the triangle is unknown. In example 1, it says, write an equation that can be used to find the length of the ladder. Then solve, round to the nearest tenth. Notice that the distance from the building itself, and the ladder form a right triangle. Use the Pythagorean theorem. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We learned this formula in the last section. And we can plug these numbers in, the legs, to a and b to find the hypotenuse c. So we plug in 8.75 and 18. We square those numbers and add them together. And then we find the square root. The square root can be positive or negative 20. Since the length cannot be negative, the ladder is about 20 feet long. In example 2, it says write an equation that can be used to find the height of a plane. Then solve, round to the nearest tenth. The distance between the planes is the hypotenuse of a right triangle. Use the Pythagorean theorem. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Here we know one of the legs and the hypotenuse, and we need to find the other leg. So they left b open. They plugged in the 10 and the 12, and they found that b squared should be equal to 44. Well, the square root of 44 is positive or negative 6.6. Since the length cannot be negative, the height of the plane is about 6.6 miles. Let's do it here in example 1. It says write an equation that can be used to find the length of the boat ramp, then solve, round to the nearest tenth. So we will use the Pythagorean theorem. Because this is a right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It looks like we don't know our hypotenuse. So we will say 4.2 squared plus 25 squared is equal to c squared. And I'm not sure what these numbers are, so let's do them in our calculator or our type tool. 4.2 to the power of 2 is 17.64, and 25 to the power of 2 is 625. If I add those numbers together, 17.64 and 625, I get 642.64, and then the square root of 642.64 is 25.4. Okay, so let's plug all these values back into our equation. So 4.2 squared, this was 17.64. 25 squared was 625, and that needs to be equal to c squared. 17.64 add 625 was 642.64. And then if we find the square root, then 25.4 is equal to c. Positive or negative. So we will say since length not be negative, the length of the boat ramp is about 25.4 feet. In example 2, it looks like I know one side and the hypotenuse, but not the other side. So let's write an equation that can be used to find the length of the backboard and then solve round to the nearest tenth. So we will use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Let's see, 42 squared plus b squared should be equal to 83.4 squared. And I'm not sure what these values are. So 42 to the power of 2 and 83.4 to the power of 2. Let's plug those in. So 1,764 plus b squared needs to be equal to 6,955.56. Next step is to subtract 1,764 from both sides to get b squared equals 5,191.6. Actually 0.56, and then the next step is to find the square root. So the square root of that number is 72.1. Going back to the problem, this is positive or negative. Since length cannot be negative, the length of the backboard is about 72.1 inches. Go ahead and try got it A, and then resume this video when you're done. Got it A says, Mr. Parsons wants to build a new banister for the staircase shown. If the rise of the stairs of a building is 5 feet and the run is 12 feet, what will be the length of the new barrier? All right, so we can use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. And it looks like we know the two legs. So 5 squared plus 12 squared is equal to c squared. 5 squared is 25. 12 squared is 144 equals c squared. 25 and 144 make 169. And the square root of 169 is positive or negative 13. Let's copy our sentence from before. Since length cannot be negative, the length of the banister is about 13 feet. The Pythagorean theorem in 3 dimensions. You can use Pythagorean theorem to find missing measures in 3-dimensional figures. In example 3, it says a 12-foot flagpole is placed in the center of a square area. To stabilize the pole, a wire will stretch from the top of the pole to each corner of the square. The flagpole is 7 feet from each corner of the square. What is the length of each wire? Round to the nearest tenth. So the flagpole is 12 feet tall and 7 feet from each corner. So we can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse, which would be the length of the wire. They plug in 7 and 12. And they get 193, and they find the square root, which is 13.9. So the length of the wire is about 13.9 feet. We can do the same thing here. It says the slant height of a pyramid is the height of each lateral face. So that's this face that is not standing perfectly straight up and down. It's sort of at an angle. That's the lateral face. What is the slant height of the pyramid shown? Round to the nearest tenth. So we have a base and a height here, and we can use the Pythagorean theorem to figure this out. A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. 4 centimeters, or 4 squared plus 11 squared is equal to C squared. So that's 16 plus 121 is equal to C squared. That would be 137 is equal to C squared. The square root of 137 is 11.7, positive or negative. We'll copy our sentence from before. Since length cannot be negative, the length of the slant height is about 11.7 centimeters. Go ahead and try out at B, and then resume this video when you're done. Gotta B says the top part of a circus tent is in the shape of a cone. The tent has a radius of 50 feet. The distance from the top of the tent to the edge is 61 feet. How tall is the top part of the tent round to the nearest whole number? So on this one, we know the hypotenuse and one leg. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. In this case, A squared plus 50 squared is equal to 61 squared. Let's do 50 squared, 61 squared, and let's subtract to find the difference. And then let's find the square root of that number. Okay. So let's plug these numbers in. We have A squared, that can stay, plus 50 squared, we found that was 2,500. And then 61 squared, which is 3,721. Next step is to subtract 2,500 from both sides. We did that here. So now A squared is equal to 1,221. Next step is to find the square root of both sides. We did that here. And we got A is equal to positive or negative 35. It does say to round to the nearest whole number, so 9 rounds to 34 up to 35. And we'll say, since length cannot be negative, the top part of the tent is about 35 feet tall.